In 2014, a wealthy California woman met the man of her dreams online. After 4 failed marriages, she finally thought she'd met Mr. Right. Her dream man, however, soon turned out to be her worst nightmare as the sinister truth about him was revealed. What's more, her own children would find themselves in his line of fire. This is the story of a psychopathic con man living in a web of lies. This is the case of Dirty John Meehan. Hi guys, just want to say thank you to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this video. As you know, me and Pete, we're into fitness, and on a really serious note, sorry, I can't help but have the comedy element in here. I think it's really important to look after your body. It's the only thing that gets you from A to B, and you want it to do it in the best way possible. The thing about AG1 is it's got me covered. So even when I have days like today when my throat hurts, I know that I'm getting every nutrient I need from my food. It's my multivitamin, it's my multi-minerals, my pre and probiotics, it's got immunity support and greens all in one. So easy as well. 1 scoop once a day, add it to 8 to 10 ounces of cold water, and it tastes really nice. I genuinely mean that. Bear in mind, on top of all the amazing things that I've already told you about Athletic Greens, just remember it promotes your gut health, it supports your immunity, it boosts energy, it helps recovery so that you get over things more quickly, and it is backed by science. It's obsessively researched, literally obsessively. It's got 75 vitamins, minerals and nutrients, and that blows my mind. It's also full of the good stuff. So it's NSF certified for sport, it's gluten-free, no eggs, no sugar added, it's nut-free, it's dairy-free, no GMOs, no herbicides, no pesticides, no artificial colours, no flavours, no preservatives, none of those things that go in to make products less healthy are in this. It's absolutely amazing. If there's one thing that you consider today, it's getting some of these bad boys in your life. Also, just follow his exercise routine if you want to add a 5-minute experience of healthy exercise to your day. So there you go, really simple, really easy to make, and genuinely really tasty. And what's better than anything is you know that you're looking after your body in a really simple way, which I love. I start the day with one of these every single day. They are absolutely amazing and they taste great. Click the link below. Back to your exercise routine. How dare you put down the kettlebell? And if you too want to get these greens in your life, which you absolutely should, click on my link to get a 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D3K2, and you'll also get 5 travel packs free with your first purchase. Hi, and welcome back to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. You may notice I'm a little bit on the raspy side voice-wise. I have a very bad cold, but crime and consistency is me tagline, so therefore I'm carrying on, in spite of sounding like a bloke who smokes over 60 cigarettes a day. I don't. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate all of you coming back. If you don't know who I am, I release my crime content on a Wednesday and a Sunday religiously. As I said, crime and consistency is my catchphrase. Today's case, loads of you have asked me about, and I have heard all about this case before because it's been documented in series, and I did watch a little bit of a series on this, but kind of zoned out in the end. So it has been really intriguing researching it, because it really does put you off dating. Just gonna throw it out there now. Anyway, thank you for joining me. As I said, let's get on with today's story. So who was John Michael Meehan? Well, he was born on the 3rd of February 1959. He had 2 sisters, Donna and Karen. His father was William, and William ran the Diamond Wheel Casino in San Jose. Meehan and his siblings, they earned money actually cleaning there, so they had jobs there. And I'm going to be honest, it seems from my research that there was one big driving factor in Meehan's life from as early as recalled, and that is money. It was a huge driving force. It was his life's blood. The problem is that he wasn't necessarily that bothered about being scrupulous as regards where money came from. Now, there is a weird kind of link, I would say, in the fact that his father, let's say he was involved in some dubious financial practices, and that definitely influenced the way that Meehan's future behaviour was. So his dad was involved in lots of illegal activities. This included fake lawsuits. It included insurance scams. Also, his dad claimed to have these mafia connections. So this kid's growing up with a role model who isn't necessarily too positive, and also claims to have all of these powerful links whilst at the same time being involved in fraud. And that's a big deal, because as a child, you want to believe that the person that you love who's bringing you up is somebody that you can look up to. And it's incredible how children will still have a bias to look up to people who are really dirty in their behaviour, because the connection with them is love. And therefore it minimises that type of activity and maximises the belief that the relationship is a positive one, and also maximises the potential within that positivity for those children to take on the traits, because otherwise you have to look at your parent and think, actually, they weren't a very nice person, and that's hard psychologically to stretch. We often forgive our adult parents many ways and for many things because we just want to retain that relationship. Now, academically at school, Meehan was actually an outstanding student. Often I will look back at, shall we say, young people who've had problematic adulthoods, and we can explore how academically they might have struggled, and they may have had some really awful experiences to add to that. But certainly, as far as this guy is concerned, straight A's. And it wasn't even as if he was just brilliant academically. He wasn't. He was a great athlete. He had academic and sporting prowess, which understandably made him a really popular student. So I don't know. When you think about your own school days, maybe you were like John Meehan and you were some kind of athletic academic genius. But certainly for somebody like myself, if I look back at school and think, what could have made school a little bit more palatable, it would be things like straight A's and being an incredible athlete. Because one, everybody likes you. Everybody's like, that's the person who can do everything. And it just gives you that popularity, but also people like you for the right reasons. Not, for example, like reasons such as hiding it in a cupboard all the way through a Latin lesson, playing the recorder. Not saying that like I did it, I'm just saying that, you know, if you're not like very bright and you want people to notice you and like you, maybe you would do really stupid things like that aren't even funny in an attempt to draw attention to yourself. But you don't need to if you can run really fast and also you're brilliant at all your work and your teachers love you. They're the things that make school brilliant. So he had that, he really did. Also massively popular amongst the female students. So he's got everything going for him, simple as that. However, as opposed to that creating a level of humility, because it's really important when you are great at everything and popular and people like you and people find you attractive, to realise that you are very blessed. You didn't create that. It's just the look of the DNA draw, and you looked out. At the end of the day, you won big time, but that's it, end of. You're not somebody who should feel any level of superiority because you got lucky. You won the lottery genetically. But he's not like that. He develops this really intense superiority complex. So he feels like he's more intelligent than anybody else. He feels like he's better looking than everybody else. And they are the least desirable qualities that any human being can have, aren't they? You are around a person who is arrogant and superior for like 5 minutes and you don't want to be anywhere near them again. because their job in life, as far as they are concerned, is to prove your inferiority. And nobody wants to be in a space where other people demand that they are better than you and point out your failings. And people who have those kind of intelligent superiority and athletic belief systems about themselves, they're certainly not very good people to hang out with. So Meehan realizes that he's better as far as he's concerned than the world around him and everybody within it. And he starts realizing that because he's of intelligence, he can kind of manipulate people. He can use his charisma, his good looks, and the popularity that he has in his life to his advantage. He realizes that he can manipulate people pretty easily. He can get what he wants out of them, and that's what he did. His own sister actually referred later to him as a hustler, and I think that that really does sum him up. It's a very light touch description of the person we're going to describe in the future, but certainly hustler is the kind of individual that personifies this Meehan character. And there are very few people in this world who will just do whatever it takes to get what they want. You know, it's always a real cause for concern when a human being is so centric, so focused, so refusing to acknowledge the needs of anybody else around them at a cost to what they desire. That's something that's very disturbing in human characteristics. I appreciate psychologically ambition is really important. Competition is important. We are human beings. We want to win. We want to succeed. However, how we get there denotes the kind of human being that we are. If we win in a fair run and we shake hands at the end of it, everyone knew what they were doing, they were in the same race, and it's congratulations to you for getting that gold medal. But if the person that you are competing against has absolutely no idea that they're in a competition and you have so many dirty tricks that you can exploit and affect them with, then it's never a fair fight, it's never a fair run, and it's certainly concerning when human beings just see what they want and will achieve it no matter the cost to anybody else around them. Now, when we look at his childhood growing up, he, I would say, appears to have had a really idyllic childhood. Yes, we know his father was into a few dodgy things, but still, he seemed happy. But then there's a divorce. And this genuinely, as far as I can see, triggers something. So his parents, William and Dolores, they get divorced, and it just shifts something within Meehan. And the impact seems to be really enormous. And he even starts to discuss the fact that he hates his mother, he hates his father. Now, when his father died of cancer, his sister was even convinced that Meehan had accelerated his death. So Meehan was alone in the hospice with his dad when he died. And his sister believes fully that he injected him with an overdose of painkillers because he wanted to speed up the death and get the inheritance. It must be horrific for Meehan's sister to believe that a man that should have been so trusted with her father was potentially the reason that he died more quickly. And I'm sure that for somebody like Meehan, because of the superiority and arrogance and belief systems and biases he created for himself, he would have seen that as just him merely speeding up the process and preventing his father having to deal with any more pain. It's incredible how you can do that. You can kind of create this bias and belief system so that somehow, even though you're murdering somebody, really you're just somebody who's trying to look after them and care for them as they're cradled into the next life. Now, when Meehan's parents separated, he was in high school, so we can all agree that that is a pretty pivotal time, and relationships with parents are really powerful then, and the idea of suddenly having that dysfunction and breaking down the perfect image of his life is potentially where the fracture begins. Now, this is where he starts to follow, I would say, in his father's footsteps. So criminality surfaces. And that criminality is something that doesn't just surface, it remains and it dominates literally the rest of his life. So after graduating high school, he first of all starts working as an orderly in hospitals. Bear in mind, he's this incredibly bright young man, straight A student, really popular. As far as Future is concerned, he can write his own checks at this point. He can get into places that other people could only dream of. And he actually does gain entry into Santa Clara University. And this is when I would say he should be thriving, right? This is when getting into that university and working as an orderly in hospitals so that he can fund this, it's going to mean that he's on this path to brilliance. But that isn't what happens. It's like he starts to formulate a world all about dodgy dealings. He starts using drugs, so he's dealing cocaine, and he actually gets arrested ultimately for dealing cocaine. And this symbolizes the kind of human being Meehan is. So it must be scary getting arrested, I appreciate that, but you take responsibility, accountability, you acknowledge what you've done, hopefully you repair that behaviour and you move forward. But he was just really happy to turn his best friend in and to actually testify against him as part of a plea deal for a lesser sentence for himself. So it's like he's done something wrong, but he's going to throw his best friend under the bus to ensure that he has a lesser sentence. Now, under the agreed terms of that conviction, he also had to leave California. And this clearly means that he has a complete change of life. And this criminality is going to affect him, of course it is. But just like his dad, instead of thinking, this is my warning, this is my consequence, this is my moment to recalibrate and move on, he's just going to go straight down into all the dodgy scams, full stop. It's all about now getting what he can in the best way possible for himself without any consideration of consequence, without any conscience whatsoever. So on one occasion, for example, he puts broken glass into his food order because obviously that's a way to avoid paying. He would throw himself in front of cars to get compensation. That's another thing that he'd do. Have any of you ever watched some of those films and footages on dash cams of people doing it? You are like, oh, it's really good that we have dash cams because not only are you not going to actually get away with suing this person, we can all watch you look like an absolute hapless fool. Anyway, this is what he would do, throw himself in front of cars. And when he threw himself in front of the cars, he actually did sometimes get hurt. It didn't really bother him though. As far as he was concerned, it was a means to an end, so to speak. Actually, ironically, it would have been better maybe if he had thrown himself in front of a, I don't know, HGV lorry that was going forward, but then needed to reverse, then realised it needed to go forward again. Could have been a very different outcome to this story, full stop. He robbed people blind, genuinely. So he'd go around people's houses, he'd take money for roofing jobs, but he would never actually do the work. And then he started the fraud on credit cards. So he'd use loads of fake names on countless credit cards. By the way, for those of you who are like, how does this happen? In a time of two-factor authentication, in a time where we've got facial recognition, that's because none of that existed then, of course. And back in the day, you used to just be able to apply for credit cards anywhere. Walk into a service station, filling up your car with petrol, there'd be somebody going, do you want this credit card? You had 5 minutes, you'd fill it in. Just fill in somebody else's details. Genuinely, it was not difficult at all. But that's what he starts to do. Because of course, if you've got a £5,000 credit limit and you've got 15 different cards, that's going to bring you in a nice little income. Now it gets to 1988. Bear in mind, he's been forced to leave California. So at this point, he completes a Bachelor of Arts degree, and that's at the University of Arizona. Now after this, he enrolled at the University of Dayton's Law School, but he never qualified. So during the second year of attending there, he basically doesn't get good grades, so he leaves at that moment in time. And ironically, it is at this point that he gets the nickname that definitely sticks with him for the rest of his life, Dirty John or Filthy John. His friends basically believe that he certainly suited that name because he was constantly womanizing. He had this really disreputable behavior. He would be constantly bringing women back to the lodgings. So it was this constant conveyor belt as far as his friends were concerned. He wasn't committing to anybody. He was using women and he essentially brought them in they left, he brought another one in, and so on and so forth. So he certainly did live up to his nickname. And actually, there's this really worrying piece of information that came up in my research, which is that on one occasion he rented one of his housemates a truck that had no brakes. Now, he claimed that he was unaware of that, but the truth is, all that mattered is the money. Just kind of do that mental maths in that moment. He rented a housemate a truck that had no brakes. It's only going to go one way, isn't it? And it's not going to go uphill. It's going to go downhill fast. The point is, you are absolutely willing to put somebody's life at risk just because of some money. And he's willing to do that. That would be a catastrophic possibility and potential. And yet Meehan just doesn't have that concern. He doesn't have the guilt. He doesn't have the social responsibility, because you have to think about all of those concepts when you imagine giving somebody a truck with no brakes. It's not just about the danger that it places that individual driving in. It's the people that are driving cars, it's the kids that are walking down the road, it's the mother pushing a baby in a trolley, and so on and so forth. That's what you are doing. So if you don't have the links in your brain potentially between, let's say, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, you are not going to be able to compute the same level of risk and guilt and concern and fear that would be mediated if they had effective connections. I'm not saying that's the case, but certainly lending somebody a van that's going to be dangerous certainly doesn't think about consequences, certainly doesn't suggest that the impulse control is there. It seems to be less about what could happen and more about the instantaneous gratification of gaining cash. We get to November 1990. Now, at this point, he's had a 2-year relationship and he's 31. He marries 25-year-old anaesthetist nurse Tonya Sells. Now, she thought she was marrying a 26-year-old. Genuinely, that happened. So Meehan is 31. He's not 63. At the end of the day, at 31, you shouldn't be shaving years off your age, should you? My age, you should be doing that. I get younger now. I have changed the chronology of my existence. Time is just a concept, and I am conceiving that it's going backwards. But if you're 31 years of age and you're marrying a 25-year-old, that seems completely acceptable. But no, he's made up this fantasy that he's 26 years of age. Also, bit of an issue. Just going to throw it out there. Is it an issue, Emma? I think it is a bit of an issue. The age thing, that is a bit of an issue as well, because at the end of the day, it's only a few years older, so why not just be honest? But what is the issue? The issue is that she married a guy that she thought was 26, but also she married a guy that she thought had a different name. Yeah. So even though, to be fair, it's still Jonathan as opposed to John, the point is he's changing things. He's making distinctions and distinguishing who he used to be as to who he is now. So he's not identifiable to her realistically as the person he really is, because she's actually with John Meehan, who's 31, but she's marrying Jonathan, who's 26. That is massive alarm bells ringing everywhere. Also, no one from his family side turned up to the ceremony. None of them. Now, Meehan claims that it's because his father was an alcoholic and his mother was addicted to prescription drugs. Of course, it's going to be, isn't it? It's going to be none of my family have come, because even though I am an incredible 26-year-old success called Jonathan, I am still an individual who has had to deal with the most insane vulnerabilities in my childhood to arrive at such a successful place in my life. Feel sorry for me. That's the kind of way to build relationships, isn't it? And it's so important that we feel that way as altruistic human beings. So he knows exactly how to build that relationship with that vulnerability, because we're all going to feel sorry for somebody who's like, I haven't got any family. None of my family are coming. Feel very sorry for me. Also, my family might know that I'm actually 5 years older than I'm telling you. Oh, and I'm called John. They might be a problem, but just ignore that. So he's built this relationship with her based on lies. Also, in introducing, as I said, the family's vulnerabilities and the issues that he's had with his past, well, that's great, because it's a carte blanche statement that there's not going to be any involvement from them. Her expectations will be that there's a toxicity there, and it's very difficult for her as his wife to broach that, because he said, this is how it is. Nothing's probably going to get better. I want to have a relationship with you and not with them. However, before I move on, just going to throw this bit of life advice in. Ignore it if you wish to. But if you are in a long-term relationship and you decide that you're going to get married, there's a few things I'd suggest doing. First of all, always good to look at the passport, you know, have a glance. Oh, hang on. Mark? Yeah? Why does it say you're called Alan? Oh, I don't know. It says you're 43 as well, not 29. Did the door slam? Where's Mark gone? That kind of thing. That's one thing you could do. The other thing is, if they say no one is coming to the wedding, be like, that's cool, but I just need to meet a member of your family. Just a few. Before, even if it doesn't go well. I just want to know they exist. Because otherwise you are blanket accepting that they are a victim and everybody else is a perpetrator, when actually they may have created and concocted this story, which is basically creating a prison where information is concerned that only they own the key to. And that's worrying without a doubt. But like I said, this is why he did it, because he didn't want Tonya to meet any of his family. He managed to convince her they were dodgy, that he'd escaped them, and this is why he's such a great guy. It's had nothing to do with my awful family. I'm just great because I'm somebody who's resilient and can cope with all of these horrible things. My family are nasty. Oh, I can't imagine what that wedding would have looked like. All her family there and just like John by himself. And after they got married, the couple did go on to have 2 daughters. And Meehan actually went into the same career as Tonya. And because Tonya was a lovely, loving wife, she even helped fund his way through nursing school. And on the face of it, with respect to people who were, you know, looking in from the outside with less suspicious eyes than mine, he seemed like a good guy. Good husband, good father. Obviously he wasn't. Turns out he was just using her like he had done for his whole past, you know. He just used women to get what he wanted. So after 10 years of marriage, this is once his career's established, he tells her he wants a divorce. So yeah, basically after 10 years of being married, he just says he wants a divorce, and she would understandably be like, why? Why on earth do you want to divorce me? And it's not the normal. It's not the, well, at the end of the day, I just feel like our lives going in different directions. Or it's not you, it's me, which is ridiculous because what the person's actually saying is it's definitely you. It's you. I'm going to say it's me, but it's you. That's why I'm leaving you. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. However, he just goes for a as far as I'm concerned, worse way of expressing why he's leaving. He tells her that she's served her purpose. Yeah, your work here is done, my wife. I no longer require your services. This is a woman who has helped him career-wise, who has helped to fund his academic levels within his career, who has essentially provided him with a stable home. And now he's had enough and is moving on because he sees himself going to bigger and better and brighter places. It just highlights the degree and level of narcissism within him, doesn't it? Now, Tonya, at this point, understandably, probably thinks, I don't know whether I know this guy. Because Tonya's probably thinking to herself, there's little quirks about our relationship. Just thinking back to the wedding when Jonathan and I were there and all my family was there, and there was me, my family, and Jonathan had nobody. And now I'm thinking that he looked a little bit older than I did think. I just thought he'd had a hard life because of his childhood. I'm just going to go and check a few things out. So she manages to go and track down Meehan's mother. That's Dolores. And of course, Dolores tells her the truth about the wayward child. So first of all, she's like, yeah, he's not actually called Jonathan, he's called John. And also, you've been dating somebody 5 years older than you believed he was. Also, she highlighted the fact that he hadn't exactly been a good boy. You know, been charged with a drug offence in California. And it's at this point that Tonya's like, the penny has dropped. I have been married to a stranger. She didn't know him at all. This guy that she'd spent a decade with, birthed 2 children to, and she hadn't got a clue about him in reality. Also, she made a really alarming discovery because Meehan had actually been taking drugs that were meant for his patients. So it turned out that he was actually addicted to Versed and fentanyl. Now, she ended up reporting him to the police in September 2000, and understandably, he lost his job at the hospital where he was working because he'd been taking the drugs that were meant to help the patients. Any of you who don't know things like fentanyl, imagine the strongest type of painkiller, highly addictive, can kill you in very small amounts. But also, particularly if you're in a situation where you're in agony or even coming to the end of your life, then fentanyl and drugs like that are obviously very effective at reducing the feelings of pain. He's taken it for himself, meaning that those very vulnerable patients would not have been receiving the care that they deserved and could potentially have been in situations of dire agony because he just didn't care about anybody but himself. So he loses his job, and then it's at this point, as opposed to just thinking, probably should acknowledge what an arse I've been, he's like, no, I'm really upset now with Tonya. So he starts threatening Tonya, and he basically insinuates that he's going to have her killed. So again, we're seeing that real low impulse control, aren't we? He's not thinking about the consequences. We've got Tonya, who's a bright woman, a capable woman. She is a classic female where she's like, I have been scorned. A scorned woman is more furious than the devil. They say it, hell hath no fury. And Tonya no doubt feels that way. And Tonya, who's a law-abiding, sensible citizen, knows that this guy is somebody that she really doesn't know. So it's all very well just saying, well, he's just really angry with me, he's angry for my actions, for what he's lost. But she knows that this is a man who's capable of lying about his age, capable about lying about his name and his family history. Why wouldn't that make her concerned? If he's saying, I'm going to have you killed, well, hey, he's certainly got form, hasn't he? He's certainly quite happy distorting reality. So she reports that and is subsequently given a suspended sentence for menacing behaviour. Now, following the police investigation, all about him stealing the drugs from patients, Meehan does plead guilty to felony drug theft in 2002, and he's supposed to go to a drug rehab treatment because clearly he is an addict. But he doesn't. He's like, well, I could go and get clean to this drug rehab treatment. That seems like a good idea. I've obviously got a bit of a problem in stealing drugs from patients, ruined my career to some degree. But no, he's like, I could do that, but also I could steal an anesthesia kit and just leave the state. Literally does that. Because that's safe, isn't it? We all know anesthetics, they're easy to manage. You don't need a consultant, a range of nurses, an anaesthetist, an anaesthetist assistant to make sure that you come round well from your operation. No. I mean, it's fine. Just take one of those kits. What could possibly go wrong? Well, he's found unconscious, surrounded by drug paraphernalia in a motel room in Michigan. That's what can go wrong. And incredibly, and this is incredible, on the way to hospital, after he's just been found, in that situation, unconscious, as opposed to just lying there and thinking, my God, thank you, I have been found and saved. No, he just grabs the drug kit from the ambulance and jumps from it. That literally happened. He jumps out of a moving ambulance. And I don't know about you guys, gonna throw it out there. I wasn't in the ambulance. I wasn't on the road at the time. It's just an assumption I'm making. But I've seen ambulances and they go quite fast when they've got somebody unconscious in the back. They often have the lights on, don't they? And it makes a noise because they want the cars to get out of the way. This does not perturb him in any way, shape or form. Just throws himself, but not before, as I said, he grabs the drugs kit. At this point, he even runs into a department store, climbs into the lift shaft, and when the police try to apprehend him, he just kicks an officer in the face. Now, in that moment, something really bad happens, essentially. He falls from the shaft, knocks himself unconscious, and then is finally arrested for what can only be described as a bizarre action, behaviour-wise. And he ends up spending 17 months in prison. I do, as I'm sure you'll all agree, recognise that it's likely under the influence that he was acting in an erratic state because he didn't really understand what was going on where he was, at least to some degree. But the fact that he manages during the ambulance drive to take a drugs kit, it says that he's not completely outside the realms of understanding what's happening. So if in that moment he can manipulate a scenario where he escapes, but escapes with drugs, it says that at least he's computing to some degree. So then he goes to prison, and he leaves prison in 2004. And his sister Donna, well, she's lovely. She's made loads of arrangements. You know, this woman who, according to him and according to people who knew him, remember, his family's this disaster. And yet look at Donna. She's helping him rebuild his life. She'd saved his home from foreclosure. She even retrieved his car from the impound. Who would not like a sister like Donna, with respect? She believes in him. She believes in his potential. She feels that he is savable. She wants to see him thrive. And she creates an environment where that's possible. So many of us would certainly not feel that we could reach into that situation, particularly when somebody is a really high level dependent, but she believes he can make it. And during the following 3 years after that, Donna gave him a place to live. She gave him a job when he followed her to California. She lent him $90,000 and never saw a cent of it back. I think we could all see that one coming, but Donna's lovely, bear in mind. She's doing this from the goodness of her heart. Now, he had this perfect opportunity. He had a chance of a fresh start, but that's not Meehan. Meehan's bad to the core. All he does immediately is revert to his previous behaviour. So immediately he starts looking for victims that he can exploit. And what was his MO? Well, it was pretty much the same. He'd meet as many women as he could potentially meet, and then he would attach himself to the wealthiest. And that, for him, is grading up constantly, isn't it? You go out for a date, you ask some questions, meet another woman, do the same, and you kind of start over the few weeks that you're seeing them to envisage whether this individual is somebody that you want to stick with because they can give you a lifestyle that you desire. Now, before long, he'd also realised that being a particular type of man was going to be more appealing to women. So he starts saying that he's a doctor. And that opportunity to meet people online really elevates and escalates that possibility and potential for him to be seen this way. Because of course, you go online, you look at somebody's profile, somebody says they're a doctor, you just have a bias. And let's be honest, guys, we all would. If I, as a woman, suddenly found myself single and I was on the internet looking for dates, it would never happen. I'm technologically pathetic and I'm more likely to end up with a grocery shop than a partner. That's how terrible I am. But let's say that my kids were like, Mum, you need to meet somebody, and they decided to help me by setting up a profile for me, organising my dates and corresponding with individuals as pretending to be me so that I could actually eventually go on a date. They would certainly, as I would, look at a profile where somebody says doctor or vet or lawyer and so on and so forth. You instantly think, ooh, clever, stable, successful. Now that could be absolute rubbish, even if they were qualified as those individuals. We all know, for example, that a lot of doctors have high levels of issues with things like alcohol and pain prescriptions. So we do know that just because our bias believes it doesn't make it a reality. But certainly you're going to get the right swipe if you've got a great career, and he knows that. And when he's actually online, we're still looking at an infancy of online dating. So people aren't as savvy as they are today. And even today, we see con artists using the web constantly and very, very successfully. So he meets all these women, posing as a doctor, and then he just seduces them and swindles multiple victims. And I mean swindles them to the point where 3 women had restraining orders against him and 3 more requested them in total. Can you imagine that? So 3 women actually successfully have restraining orders and 3 requested them. In total, looking back at Meehan's history, he would terrorize more than 50 women. It's grotesque, absolutely grotesque. It was his full-time lifestyle career choice to find, exploit and squeeze the resources from these women. And even though, unfortunately for him, he was meeting bright women who could sniff that out in the end, the point was he did unbelievable damage to them when he was using them to get whatever it was that he wanted. And bear in mind what love bombers do. They make you feel so special for a very short period of time, and then they confuse you because you're thinking, well, this is the same person that I was falling for. Why is he being such an arse? Maybe there's something wrong with me. That's how they play this game. So we get to 2014, and at this point, Meehan basically begins a relationship with a woman who had been at his hospital. She was a patient, and she wakes up and he's just stood by her bed. Now, he claims at this moment in time he's an anaesthetist. So, of course, wow, this guy's standing there. She's obviously in a scenario where she's coming around and she's being vulnerable, and he's a knight in shining armor. He looks the part, he's dressed as the part, and they connect. So then there's this brief period of dating, but she starts to get a bit wary because he starts suggesting that she transfers money into his bank account because he says it's a way of her hiding that money from her estranged husband. So she's a wealthy writer, by the way, so she's a very, very successful person. In fact, her wealth totaled $40 million. It's a lot of money, isn't it? And he must have thought that his Christmases had come at once because he's managed to worm himself into this scenario where they're dating. Now, she ultimately ends the relationship. And again, true to form, as opposed to just walking away and accepting that this is over, no. He threatens her, sends her really awful messages, even sends her family intimate photos of her. And he then says he'd leave her alone if she transfers cash. It's quite unbelievable, isn't it? This person is so unaware of the consequential behaviours and what these threats have already cost him in the past, that he just continues to act in this completely deplorable way. Having somebody send intimate photos of you to your family is just horrible, isn't it? It's just a way of really trying to humiliate and violate them. It's to make them feel embarrassed but also ashamed, and it's a way of letting people know, hey, I've got power over you. You've hurt me. You've not allowed me to take from you in the way I want to, so now I'm going to take something from you. I'm going to take your security. I'm going to take your privacy. I'm going to even take the boundaries that you have between relations in your families by demonstrating this action where they're now seeing you in really inappropriate, as far as they would be concerned, photos. I mean, you've done nothing wrong having those photos taken, but certainly you don't want to see a member of your family in those compromising situations. And like I said, he basically says, you need to give me money and I'll stop. So he says, you're in way over your head on this one. Make it happen and I will walk away. If not, I will be your nightmare. Now he's ultimately arrested. Of course he is. She's got $40 million. Getting law enforcement to help her or lawyers involved in the case, not going to be difficult. You know, this guy's going to be a straight A student, but he's not got any common sense, has he, whatsoever? So he ultimately gets arrested. He's later rightfully convicted of stalking her. But at this point, he's literally driving a car that he'd extorted from another one of his female victims. He was living in an RV that he'd swindled from yet another victim. And during the search of that RV, police found a revolver, ammunition, binoculars, duct tape, zip ties, a GPS unit, and capsules of cyanide. I mean, shall we go through that again, guys? So he's been threatening people. We already know that he's got form, and he's managed to swindle a car and an RV out of his victims. And the police go around, and I don't know, if the police were to search my car, well, I don't have one, with respect. If the police were to search my husband's car, you would find things like mints. There'd probably be lemon sherbets, but only if he hadn't been on a long journey. If he had, there'd be none because he eats them all. He's very selfish with his lemon sherbets. There'd be a sock. There's always something like a sock. There might be a throw in there because of the dogs. You know, the kind of box standard stuff. What you wouldn't find in, I don't know, pretty much anybody's car would be revolver, ammunition, binoculars, duct tape, zip ties, a GPS unit, and capsules of cyanide. That's the kill kit every single day of the week. It's not even just an ordinary kill kit. When you think about Ted Bundy, horrific human being, he had a kill kit. This is really upping the ante on the old kill kit. Who has capsules of cyanide? Turns out Meehan does. So obviously when the police recover this, they're like, I don't think this guy should be walking the streets. So when he's awaiting trial, he's obviously inside. And it's at this point he allegedly offers other inmates $10,000 for each murder of 2 detectives and 5 witnesses. So basically it's got these 7 individuals that he wants murdered, and he's willing to pay them $10,000 for each individual. It's unbelievable. It's quite telling that this guy doesn't feel that rules apply to him. He doesn't feel any sense of moral obligation regarding the rules that he follows in the world around him. At the end of the day, the moral code is why we have laws, because we believe that the vast majority of us just do these things automatically, but there are some individuals who need guidance. And even though he should have acknowledged the guidance because of the previous convictions that he's been given and the consequences of experience, he just doesn't. It just doesn't bother him. He sets his own rules. He's concerned about himself. So he ends up having this short period of prison. Then he gets released, but of course, not for very long. He's back inside pretty soon after because he breaks the restraining order against one of his female victims. So he just got this repeated pattern of this man who does not believe that anybody has a right to curtail his behaviour, no matter how diabolical it is. Get to October 2014. It's 2 days after his release from prison. Meehan meets 59-year-old Debra Newell. This is through an online dating platform site that's specifically for the over 50s. Now, Debra was really super successful, genuinely. She had a very, very successful interior design business. She was a very wealthy woman, and she had a connection with marriage, I would say. You know, she'd had 4 failed marriages. She'd had 4 children. She had 3 daughters and a son. Now, she lived in a beautiful penthouse. Of course it is. Look at what she did. She was an interior designer, but it was gorgeous. So she lived in this place called Irvine in California, and she lived with her 24-year-old daughter, Jacqueline. But even though she'd had 4 failed marriages, she hadn't lost sight of love. She hadn't lost sight of hope. The idea of meeting somebody again was alluring for her. She wanted to meet somebody that she could travel with, that she could really enjoy her life with. And when Meehan literally came into her life, she finally felt that she'd found Mr. Right. He looked, sounded, acted like the ideal partner. He said he was a physician, he was a family man, and he told her that the reason he was back in California was because he'd actually been volunteering in Iraq with Doctors Without Borders. Now, that story in itself is profoundly intriguing and disarming and quite beautiful. Not only is she meeting a man who is a physician and he's successful and he's a family man, this is a guy who risks his life. This is an individual who isn't concerned about money. He's volunteered for a whole year. It's setting himself up as not just the perfect guy, but the super perfect pen portrait of possibility that every little girl who wants to get married to a man in the future dreams of. He's compassionate, clever, successful, loving, connected, all of these things. And they are powerful motivators in connecting bonds. So she's understandably impressed, and rightly so. Who wouldn't be impressed with those credentials? Who wouldn't be impressed with the obvious caring and empathic nature? But obviously it's complete bullshit. He's lying through his teeth. This is absolutely a thing of fantasy. But he knows exactly what she wants to hear. He knows exactly what will disarm her, will make her allured towards him. He knows that if he's going to cement this deal, he has to seem like all the qualities that every woman, every man, every person who wants a relationship would connect with. And she swallows every single bit of it. Of course she does. Why wouldn't she? She's a good person. Good people don't walk around thinking, well, I'm just going to have to psychologically profile, CAT scan, and generally have somebody come and do the hair psychopathy test on each individual that I meet. Don't get me wrong, if there was a dating agency that actually did that, they'd probably make quite a lot of money. Sets up dating agency. So, at this point, Meehan must have thought that he was the luckiest guy in the world as far as being a con artist. He'd managed to find this very wealthy woman. She was smitten with him and he had her exactly where he wanted. And Debra was really desperate for things to work out with this man. Really desperate. She didn't want another failed relationship. Understandably, no one goes into a relationship wanting it to fail. But she's at an age where she wants to enjoy herself. And this man seems to answer all of those prayers. And because she's so besotted with the idea of possibility, she starts to, I would say, overlook some pretty peculiar habits. So one of those peculiar habits that he had was he would always wear his hospital scrubs. That's even at formal occasions. So it's like he's always wearing these clothes that should be left at the work door, so to speak, particularly at formal occasions. You know, when you're looking around, there's a black tie dinner, everyone's wearing their evening gown, and then there's John in his hospital scrubs. I wonder whether he wore the hat as well. I really hope he did. I hope he was wearing the scrubs hat as well. But he's letting people know, look how important I am, I'm a doctor, and so on and so forth. Now, after literally just a handful of dates, he also starts to love bomb her. He says he loves her. He says he wants to get married to her. And Debra, yes, finds some of his quirks a little bit strange. She's like, John, could you maybe just, I don't know, put a blazer on? No, I want to wear my scrubs. Okay. Could you maybe just put a jacket, though, over the scrubs? No. Could you take the hat off? No, I like my hat. That would be enough for me to be like, it's never going to work. How will I coordinate myself on a walk with this man? But on a serious note, she genuinely feels like she's found real love, the real thing. Not quite the same where her kids are concerned. Yeah. You know, the thing about kids is, first of all, they're thinking, hang on a minute, that's my inheritance. And I'm not doing that in a glib or light way. I'm doing that in a rightful direction. If you are a child and some guy walks into the life of your unbelievably wealthy and successful mother, you are going to be thinking, I need to be taking care of the purse strings here because she is love drunk. She is not thinking and processing correctly. And I'm going to be really diligent around this man because I don't know, he could be a liar who makes things up about his name and his age, his family history, what he does for a job, where he's spent the last 12 months. You know, just those small points. Maybe I'll do a bit of a check, see whether he's the kind of individual who drives around with a kill kit, carries a few cyanide tablets, just that kind of stuff. So they're not enthusiastic whatsoever when they meet him. First of all, they know that their mother has really poor taste in men. They'd seen her be really used and abused in past relationships. So she's got that vulnerability that's just running through her veins. And he sees that and he wants to exploit that. And they are so used to seeing their mother affected this way. Now, her daughter, Jacqueline, I would say in particular, she was suspicious of him immediately. In fact, Jacqueline took, I don't know, 6 seconds to realise that there was something wrong. First of all, she felt that he looked more like a vagrant than a successful physician. She said even his fingernails were filthy. And you don't expect that from a doctor. You expect it from a gardener or a tree surgeon, but a doctor you expect to be scrupulous with their cleaning. She was also very concerned about what she considered to be dubious social skills. So he was really evasive. He would avoid conversation. He would give one-word answers when he did speak, and he wouldn't even maintain eye contact. So instantly she's like, this does not make sense. He's choosing not to engage as far as she was concerned for a reason. It's not because he hasn't got the capacity. We know he was really popular at school. We know he was somebody who'd had children in the past, been able to hold down jobs in the past and have relationships. There's a reasoning behind his silence around her children, isn't there? And it's being picked up on. Now, Debra, of course, because she's the grown-up, listen, let's put Debra in the category she deserves to be in. This is a highly credible, highly intelligent, beyond highly successful woman. You don't get the lifestyle that she's created without being a savvy character. But all of us have got something that is a weakness. If somebody can find your Achilles heel, and that's where the story of Achilles comes from, the fact that even Achilles, who should have been impenetrable, as simple as that, he isn't. Because as he's dipped into the, fluid that makes him into this incredible god, essentially, the heel where he's dipped obviously hasn't been covered in that, and therefore he is killed because of it. That's his demise, Achilles heel. And we all have one. We all have one of those. And for her, it's love. For Debra, it's being loved. She wants to feel that connection, and it blinds her. So she pretty quickly moves into a $6,500 a month house with Meehan in Newport Beach, California. A beautiful, beautiful place. Now, Meehan claimed he had tax problems, and that was why he didn't want his name on the lease. But of course, we all know that there were other reasons why he wanted to stay off the radar. Also, Debra knows that her kids are not going to be happy, so she doesn't even tell them that they're cohabiting. She knows they'll disapprove. She'd literally been seen in 5 weeks when they moved in together. And because they had constantly seen their mother being affected negatively by men, and that felt she made bad choices around guys, holding it back from them was a way of meaning that she didn't have to explain herself. But in spite of knowing all of this about her past, in spite of her experiencing some pretty dreadful experiences with past partners, for whatever reason, she is convinced that Meehan's different. She felt like he genuinely cared for her. She felt like he treated her better than any previous partner had treated her. And she felt that if she could just help her children understand that he was better than the past partners, then they'd give him the chance that he deserved. She really felt he deserved that chance. Now, when Debra's youngest daughter, this was 23-year-old Debra Newell, when she meets Meehan, she actually didn't know what to make of him. So she meets him when he's helping her mother move into a rental home. But she also notes that even though he's there doing that, he doesn't really seem too keen to interact with Debra. But this starts the suspicion. She doesn't think things add up. So he claims that he's a wealthy doctor. He's got lots of properties in Newport Beach and Palm Springs. And if you don't know those areas, believe me, they are exclusive. We would all like properties in Newport Beach and Palm Springs. If anybody wants to give me one, I will accept that. Joke. I won't accept that. Of course I'd accept that. What am I on about? No one's going to do that. Irrelevant. Don't know where I went there. I digress. Anyway, her mother, in spite of the fact that he talked this big talk, had never actually seen these properties. And also, he didn't even seem to own a car. He reckoned that he had 3, but he wasn't ever driving any of them. In fact, he was always driving her mum's car. Now, he did claim that one of them had been stolen whilst he was in Iraq. Of course it had. How convenient. Oh, that one. The really expensive one. It was amazingly expensive. It's an Aston Martin. And it wasn't just an Aston Martin. Did you ever watch James Bond? It's the James Bond Aston Martin with a lot of different things that happen in the car that make it super special. Actually, I removed some of the things from that car and I put them in an RV, and the police found them and thought it was a kill kit. But it wasn't. It was the special features in the James Bond car. Another thing that her daughter was a bit concerned about is he didn't seem to own any clothes, aside from the ones that he wore all the time. Again, he claimed all his clothes had been stolen in Iraq. Because that happens, isn't it? I mean, if I'm going to go and steal from a house, I'm not going to be thinking about TVs. I'm not going to be thinking about, I don't know, electronic equipment, computers. No. I'm going to be like, unbelievable. I've managed to get into a house of a guy who essentially is the same size of me, and I'm going to take all of his clothes. It's what burglars do all the time. If I don't see burglars on a regular occasion running down the road, escaping the home invasion that they've just got involved in, pushing one of those mobile hanger racks with loads of clothes on, I don't know that it's a Monday. I promise you. It's just such a regular occurrence. Before you know, I don't know, they set up their little store on Vinted. But anyway, this is what he said. And the reality is that Debra is an easy person to convince because she's so in love. So she ends up just buying him an entire new wardrobe, and she protects him and presents him now in a way where he looks great. So rather than this well-off professional that he's pretending to be, Debra, her daughter, is like, this guy looks unemployed, he looks like a layabout, he looks like an individual that's conning my mother, and all he seems to do is spend time playing on games. And on one occasion, Tara actually came across a box of his possessions, and like any woman, she was like, they are John's possessions. I will leave them there because that is what all people would do with good conscience. We would never look through somebody that we were suspicious of's possessions. No, I am a better person than that. That didn't happen, obviously. She was like, I am absolutely going to look through these possessions. So she rifles through them. I would too. I completely validate that course of action. And it contains like copies of his nursing qualifications. But there's nothing at all that supports his claim that he's a doctor. So Tara's now got this information about him that would cause her even more concern. And what makes it even worse is that it very quickly becomes clear that he's now living with her mother. All his possessions are in the house. So this means that, as far as she's concerned, her mum's lied to her. And that's really upsetting because she's constantly asked her mum, are you actually living with him? And she said no. So angrily, in the end, she just confronts her and demands to know why she's not being truthful. At this point, Meehan joins in the confrontation, and it's shocking. And Tara catches a glimpse of his true nature. So he starts to be really intimidating towards her, he's really domineering towards her, and he actually starts screaming at Tara. And he starts accusing her of trying to get in the way of him and her mother. He gets angry with her and says that she's been snooping through his belongings. And for Tara, as opposed to this making her back off, no. This is just confirmation as far as she's concerned. She's like, this guy absolutely has something to hide. But what's really upsetting for her is that Debra takes Meehan's side. In fact, she throws her daughter out that evening, despite the fact that it was Thanksgiving the next day. So that would be a very clear sign for Tara that her mother's chosen a new boyfriend of 5 weeks over her own flesh and blood. That's really sad, isn't it? And again, I'm not coming down harshly on Debra. I appreciate when you're lonely and love is present and you believe that all your dreams are coming true. It's almost easier to believe that your child who's angry is the problem and not the fact that you're living with the biggest con artist ever. But it must have been deeply upsetting for Tara, who loves her mother and is absolutely protecting her and trying to look after her best interests, to only find herself literally out in the cold. Now, in spite of the fact that Debra backs Meehan, he still has a problem, doesn't he? Because he's created this idea that he's a physician, and now he knows that her daughter's aware that he's a nurse. And that's not to downplay nurses, very bright people, but it's different because he's made it up about him being a doctor. So what he does is he creates this, I would say, an elaborate explanation about his qualifications. He says he's got a PhD, so he's able to call himself a doctor, and that he's also got advanced training in anesthesiology. So he's saying, I am a doctor, I'm just an academic doctor with these very good qualifications, but that's why I'm called doctor. I'm not actually a physician, a medical, I'm an academic. And she wants to believe it. Now, we get to Thanksgiving. There's a lot of tension in the air. Why? Because Tara's been thrown out for absolutely no other reason than caring for her mother. So there's a real tension. But the matters are made worse when Meehan tells Jacqueline that he wants a word with her outside in an alley. Gonna throw it out there. If somebody says to you, Jacqueline, I want a word with you in an alley outside. Go, no. 1, that sounds really bad. 2, I've watched quite a lot of films where bad things happen in alleys. And 3, why would we go in an alley? We have a beautiful home where we can discuss this over a glass of wine. It is Thanksgiving after all. But this just strengthens the belief where the kids are concerned that there's something very, very wrong with him. Because as she notes, listen, if you've got something to say to me, just say it in front of everyone. And so at this point, she makes her feelings very clear about him and leaves the house. So we literally have this family essentially all feeling the same about this man who's entered Debra's life, and yet she's not heeding any of the concerns. His charm just seems to work on her. She thinks he's great. And this is perfect for Meehan. What do we know about people who are con artists or abusers? The best way of keeping your victim close is to isolate them from the family. You don't want any support network available when you are initiating this connection that you're going to exploit. Support networks cause problems. They do things like tell you the truth or suggest that your partner is lying and evidence it and so on and so forth. The more that you can keep them at a distance, the better. So he starts saying to Debra, listen, your family are a problem and I'll tell you why. They're spoilt. They're out of control. He even sent messages to Jacqueline pretending to be her mother, saying that she should just throw herself off a building and kill herself. He literally did that. Can you imagine getting that from a loving parent that you've never had an issue with, bar the odd altercation and fallout as we expect with children? Just like, oh, it's from mum. What's that? Yeah, she just told me I should throw myself off a building and kill myself. It's not mum, it's Meehan. You know what I mean? He's not very clever considering this incredible academic acclaim that he's meant to have had. He's not emotionally or relationally able to understand that that would never be taken as truth. At the end of the day, Jacqueline's going to instantly know her mother wouldn't do that. But even though these things are all going on, Debra cannot see that her kids are looking out for her. And she even goes so far as to consult a psychologist to get a professional opinion. And that professional opinion was one I would agree with. They said it's up to her who she sees. It's not for her children to make that decision. But unfortunately, in these situations, if you go to a therapist or a psychologist, the psychologist or therapist only ever has what you tell them. So if you sit down and seem to be very well adjusted, you give me your side of the story, you explain your side of the journey, I'm not there to give you an opinion. My job, unless it's very clear, is not to say, leave your relationship. There are circumstances like that, but even then, you don't do it in that way. When you're working with somebody who's being coercively controlled or violently abused and they are at risk, you have to get them out of that situation, but you have to do it in a way where they feel that they're on the journey with you. If you tell me that you're happy, if you seem to be completely well adjusted in your movements and motives, and you express that your children are acting in a spoiled manner, my job is not to then say, well, let's go through the process of understanding and profiling your partner. It would be more of a, well, it's your right as a human being, as an adult, to make choices, even if your kids don't like them. I would also want to know why the children didn't like him, and I would work that through with the individual. But certainly it makes sense that this psychologist, who didn't have a track record with John and didn't have the benefit of knowing Debra's track record in relationships, that they come to that conclusion and make that suggestion. And the psychologist even goes a little bit further. And I think that, again, I can sympathize and empathize with why this therapist or psychologist would have done that, because they talk about setting boundaries with her children and also not tolerating them shouting at her about Meehan. Now, Meehan's going to fully support this, isn't it? And that further alienates Debra from her family. Personally, I feel that if I was the psychologist, I would certainly have asked for a précis and background of prior relationships. I would have been concerned about the amount of relationships that she'd entered and divorces that then she'd endured. And I would have been concerned about the alienation potentially of the children. And I don't think that I would be setting boundaries without further knowing the information about her relationally, or even meeting with Meehan or looking at background orientated issues around this man. But nonetheless, this is what happened. So now Debra is essentially alienated from the people who care for her, and this is perfect for him. So he now is starting to pressure Debra on a pretty much daily basis to just marry him. Of course, cements the deal, doesn't it? He's professing his love for her constantly. He's letting her know that, you know, they are the perfect couple and they have a great future ahead. You know, this is all about getting her into a position where he has some legal status. Now, Debra's unsure. First of all, I don't know, she's got a bit of a track record, and that is not trying to take aim at her. Lots of us fall in love and it messes up. But she's old enough and wise enough and successful enough that she needs to second guess whether he is somebody that she wants to marry at this point, because of the fact that she's had these marriages, she's only been seeing him for 2 months. However, when he joins her on a business trip to Vegas in November 2014, he kind of comes up with this romantic notion that they can get married at the courthouse. And she feels really pressured. So in the end, she agrees. And you can understand that. because he's kind of putting that pressure on. This is perfect opportunity. That's no doubt why he joined her on that particular trip. He's thinking, this is a way, she's away from the family. I can turn on the charm, get her to go ahead and do what I want. So she marries him quickly, and none of her family's there, which is awful. Doesn't even tell the kids that they're tied the knot. So she knows this isn't ideal. It's certainly not what the wider family want. And the very fact that she's gone behind their backs means that she knows they'll disapprove, but also she feels controlled by him. That's not what you do when you have children. It's not that Debra's nasty. It's not that Debra doesn't care about her kids. It's that she knows she's letting them down. And she doesn't want to do that. And she feels controlled by this man, and she doesn't want to let him down. So she decides that she'll go through with it, but just not celebrate it, not tell anybody about it. Now, what's even more concerning, of course, is this very rushed situation meant there was no prenup agreement signed. That means that Debra's assets are now at risk. Her children's inheritance, etc., is now at risk. Now, this is really risky because she doesn't know anything about this new guy. It won't be long, of course, before money starts disappearing from Debra's purse, because now he has essentially half ownership of everything that she has. When it gets to Christmas, the family gets together, they always do, and this is at Debra's eldest daughter's, Nicole. Now, Jacqueline refuses to go. She didn't even want to be near Meehan. Tara wasn't that keen on going, but she's really desperate to see her nieces and nephews, so she agrees with her mother that Meehan would stay away from the kids, but that doesn't happen. And because that doesn't happen, she ends up becoming hysterical, which means that she ended up spending Christmas in a separate room away from the rest of the family. Now, they believed that she was just being really over-emotional, she was overreacting, but Tara wasn't overreacting. She was really worried about the boundaries that were being overstepped and the agreements that were being made that her mother was breaking with her. By that new year, Tara had actually stopped talking to her mother. So we have this really close family suddenly having these divisions and the widening. And Debra and Meehan, all the while, just seem to be getting closer and closer. Bear in mind, no one that Christmas knew they were married. Now, ultimately, Jacqueline and Tara, they get so concerned. They're like, we have to do something about this. She's not listening. We have these suspicions. We need to take it to another stage. So they end up hiring a private investigator to look into his past. And my God, that was the right thing to do. Because wow, his report. Whoa. So they were able to find out some really disturbing information. First of all, Meehan had been declared bankrupt. He wasn't a doctor. He had a nursing license only. He'd lived in several different places, including a trailer park. Not what you'd expect for such a qualified individual. Also, he'd been in prison. Hadn't been in Iraq the previous year because he'd been in prison the previous year. Imagine how that would feel. We can kind of list that and on reflection almost find the humour in him being found out, but just take a moment to be those children. Kids who are looking after their mother's interests. Kids who'd had suspicions about this man in their mother's lives. Kids who were probably concerned that he was a bit of an arse. He was somebody who maybe stretched the truth a little bit, got his feet under the table, and they wanted to know his history so they could kind of be a little bit more informed. But just imagine the moment in time when they're presented with this harsh and dark reality of this predator who is living in their mother's home, who was eating around their mother's table, who was spending time around the children in the family. Just imagine the cold, metallic moment of finding that information out. Now, when Debra's nephew, Shad Vickers, finds out about this, obviously he's really concerned. Debra and Shad, they're really close. She'd basically helped to bring him up, and he'd had some really awful tragedy because his father had shot his mother dead following their separation. Now, Shad at this point, who's obviously fundamentally connected to this woman who's been like a mother to him, he tries to warn Debra that Meehan is not who she believes he is. But again, she just sides with Meehan. It's also worth noting that anybody out there who has seen people who've been conned, you will note that they might send them 1,000, then 5,000, then 20,000. And then when people are saying, hey, mum, dad, why are you sending all this money to a stranger that you've not really had any long-term relationship with? The parent will often be angry because they think, I'm a sensible person. I don't make mistakes like this. This person loves me. They just don't understand. And then you're in so deep that it's almost more difficult to track back and say, oh my God, I'm being taken for a fool. And so often people dig themselves even further and deeper into that situation, just blindly hoping and wishing that it's all going to be okay in the end, and you'll prove those people who are naysayers wrong. But unfortunately, it's rarely, if ever, the case. So in spite of this incredibly close relationship that Shannon and Debra have, Meehan starts saying, stay away from him. And he's actually told he no longer has an aunt, which would have been devastating for Shad, already lost so deeply and dearly in his life. Even though this is all happening, what's fortunate is, bear in mind, this woman likes falling in love. She loves it. But she's also left relationships. She's had 4 divorces. So Debra might be a fool in love, but she's not a fool for long. That's important to know. So she starts realizing, you know what? I'm not sure myself. I'm starting to be concerned about his behavior. First of all, she's got absolutely no idea what he does every day when he leaves in the car. So she finally decides to look at the home security cameras. And it turns out that, as opposed to going anywhere of any meaning and interest, he's just coming home, going back to bed. I mean, we've all wanted to do that, haven't we? That's what I did when I was bunking off school. In fact, tell you a little bit of a secret, I started cycling to school, and it was a bloody 4 miles away every single day, so I could keep my bus fare. So not only could I cycle home, I wouldn't always get all the way to school before cycling home, I'd also be able to go to the shop and get some food so that when I was in bed, I could have a bit of a, I don't know, snack whilst watching my black and white matinee on my really bad TV. Just throwing it out there. We've all wanted to go home and go to sleep, haven't we? But even though she finds this out, she's really reluctant to confront him. She knows what his temper's like. Also, she notes that he starts to take in front of her a lot of strong painkillers. Now, he says it's for his back. We all know, of course, that it's because he's a massive dependent. But also, she starts to get really concerned when a letter arrives in the post to him. And she opens it. And she discovers it's not from, I don't know, a grateful individual in Iraq or a friend from Doctors Without Borders. No, it's not. It's from a former cellmate. So now she realises he's been in prison. So she then confronts Meehan, and he is furious. She confronts him with a reality of his lies, and instead of acknowledging and accepting that, he's just angry that she's read his mail. And he actually denies. He says, I've never been in jail. He says that all this is I'm corresponding with a convict and helping him out. Fortunately, at this point, Debra's like, things are not adding up. So she starts searching his office, and then she starts uncovering the evidence of the man that Meehan really was. And again, let's just take a minute to imagine this is a real woman with a real family, really being conned, and she's suddenly realizing that this man that she is married to, this man that has alienated her children from her, her nephew who's loved and so close to her from her, is actually a stranger. She has to go through that moment. She finds papers relating to all of his history for arrests, his restraining orders, and then she goes online and she starts searching his name. I don't know why she didn't do that at the beginning. Just gonna throw it out there, guys. Always look online to see whether there's any history with the person that you're going to date, because it's really helpful. It's really hard to get things removed off the web. So if they've done things that are wrong, often you'll be able to see things come up. And she is stunned to realise it is listed on datingpsychos.com. I kid you not. There were several pages related to him. And the comments that were put on that particular page relating to him said, do not let this man into your life. Don't be fooled by this charming personality. He's a parasite, he's a leech, he's an infection that festers on anyone he comes into contact with. He con me out of money, he is very persuasive, emotionally needy, sick, liar. These are all taken from that page. Can you imagine the heart-stopping, cortisol pumping moment of realization? And people were clearly afraid of him. So, Debra took an opportunity that I think we would all respect her for doing. So when Meehan checks himself into hospital, he's got back problems, Debra basically thinks, this is my way out. So the family all get together, the family that she's kind of alienated, by the way. So bear in mind just how forgiving those kids are. They understand she's been conned and they are 100% behind her, helping her get back on track. So they help her pack, they help her move out of the house that they shared. But of course, we know what Meehan's like. We know his MO, right? We know the way he operates. He's not going to let it lie. So he starts inundating her with messages, says she's the love of his life. And one of the messages actually reads, I still love you and simply can't live without you. I don't want this. I want us without anyone else. I'm flawed, but I'm not so easy to give up on you. When I met you, it was simply you. I helped you to get back on your feet and stood up for you. And for some bizarre reason, which none of us will ever understand, not at least in this universe, Debra's like, okay, I'll give you another chance. Just gonna throw it out there. Don't give people like this another chance. So the pair get back together in June 2015 and they end up moving to a new apartment in Irvine, Orange County. But of course, it doesn't take long. Debra starts regretting her decision. She becomes really suspicious about his behaviour. And she starts to really regret the estrangement of her daughters. Now, because of this, she starts sneaking around, which is just ridiculous. Why would you sneak around to speak to your kids? It's up to you to do what you want, but she obviously feels scared. So she goes off and meets Jacqueline and he catches her. So he threatens, as a result, to throw her daughter in the ocean if she tries it again. So Debra at this point realises that this is seriously wrong. And in the end she cracks and she goes and seeks an annulment of the marriage in April 2016. And this is where Meehan's true nature comes to the fore. He starts to threaten her, claims he has relatives in the mob, a bit like his dad used to. The divorce proceedings begin and he demands that he wants half her wealth. So she then tries to apply for a restraining order and it's denied, as Meehan's basically in a different state at the time. So as far as they're concerned, it's not their state issue. Now at this point, Meehan's living in Nevada in an apartment and Debra actually goes into hiding because she's really fearful of reprisals. And let me tell you, Debra may have been a fool in love, like I said, but she's not an individual who doesn't have intuition. She goes into hiding because her fears are well founded. Remember what we know about this man and what he carried in that van, in that RV. This is a man who's got form. He plans others' demise to some degree. We've seen that with him trying to bump off witnesses. And he's not going to let her go. He tracks her down. And in June 2016, CCTV catches him. He's stealing Debra's car from outside a workplace. Then he tries to set it on fire, but worse is to come. That's just a aperitif, shall we say. Just a taster of possibilities, a taster of this man's potential. We get to the 19th of August 2016. Debra's daughter Jacqueline, she spots him waiting outside her apartment. So she calls her younger sister Tara. She warns her that Meehan's in the area. And the next day, Tara actually arrived home from work at her Newport Beach apartment. And as she lets the dog out of the car, someone grabs her waist from behind and asks her, do you remember me? She realises to her horror it's Meehan. He begins attacking her with a knife. So she starts screaming. He puts his hand over her mouth, but she bites him as hard as she can. And at the time, Tara actually believed that Meehan was punching her. I'm sure a lot of you in the true crime community understand that when you're stabbed, you often feel like you're being punched. The adrenaline and cortisol stops the pain essentially because your body is concentrating on stopping you bleeding out. So she's being stabbed, but she's unaware of this. And he'd even put the knife itself in a Del Taco bag, so it was concealed in there. He stabs her again twice near the ribcage, in her arm. He's 6'2". He was over a foot taller than her petite frame. When she fell to the floor, it seemed like she didn't stand a chance, and no doubt that's exactly what the attacker thought as well. But I tell you what, was he about to be proved wrong? You see, Tara, she was resilient, resistant, and she was a warrior. She was wearing very heavy rain boots. So she managed to kick the knife from Meehan's grasp as he came down on top of her. And then she grabbed the dropped weapon and she began fighting back. And the dog, her beautiful dog, starts to bite his ankles. First, she managed to stab him in the left shoulder. And then she just carried on, repeatedly stabbing him. She knew that it was he or her. It was her life that depended on this. And in total, she stabbed him 13 times. And final one, it went through Meehan's left eye. She actually, ironically, was a big fan of Walking Dead. And apparently, it flashed through her mind that there was only one way to save her life. So in true zombie kill fashion, she destroyed his brain. Isn't it amazing? In that fight, flight, freeze moment for her, it was to have that scene play out in her head, to kill the attacker in a way that meant that they wouldn't be able to harm her further. Now bear in mind, she had serious injuries, but he did too. And you would imagine that stab through the eye would kill him, but no, it didn't. He didn't die at the scene. The paramedics did arrive quickly, and they did manage actually to get a pulse. He was rushed to hospital. They tried to save his life, but he was later declared brain dead, which one would imagine was going to happen if you have a knife put straight through your brain. And it was his sister, actually, that lovely, loving, wonderful woman who had tried to make his life so much better. It was her who had to turn his life support off. That was 4 days after he was injured that way. He was 57 years of age. It's poetic justice as far as I'm concerned, that he spent his whole life exploiting, terrorising and using women, only to be killed by one of his intended victims. When the police searched his car, well, you won't be surprised. You know what he's like for his kits? Well, they found what they considered to be a kidnap kit. There was an Oakley backpack, camouflage duct tape, cable ties, and a set of kitchen knives. Horrifying is not the word to describe that. Now, during the search of his small Nevada apartment, officers basically found it literally littered with rubbish, with pills, with drug paraphernalia. It's a far cry, of course, from this luxury we were talking about earlier when he was living with Debra. He'd just become this, I suppose, external vision of the internal mess that he was. Now, when you think about what we've talked about within this man, he displays all the traits of antisocial personality disorder, psychopathic mindset, highly narcissistic and manipulative. He used his victims to get what he wanted, money. He was a pathological liar, and he lied about anything and everything, often for no reason. He told Debra he had one sister who was dead, when actually he had two sisters who were living. He was also domestically abusive, and now he wasn't violent, as in he didn't physically attack her, but he was very coercively controlling. He went out of his way to isolate Debra from her family, from her support network, and his aim was to completely control her, and to financially control her, of course. Now, following Meehan's death, Tara understandably suffered from PTSD, and she's also experienced severe guilt, which she should not have, but she's thought about his family, she thought about people that loved him, but the truth is that that guilt was unfounded, because she later became friends with his sisters and the two daughters of his. It's incredible, isn't it? It's an amazing situation where she's guilty because she's killed this man who's terrorised her mother and almost killed her. And yet she still had that guilt. But fortunately, she was relieved of it because he was such a horrible human being that his own daughters and sisters would prefer to have her in their lives than him. And meanwhile, Tonya, that's his first wife, she personally thanked her because she'd always been convinced that one day he would kill her. Now, it all but cost Tara her life, but the truth is that in being that victim who fought back, the chances are it probably saved her mother's life. Also, it's definitely spared countless other women from falling victim to dirty John Meehan. You know, it's always important to talk about the sanctity and the sanctuary and the sacrosanct nature of life. But people like dirty John Meehan, do they really deserve the breath that they inhabit? I doubt it. I think in this case, the world is a far, far better place because of the actions of that petite and impressively warrior-like Tara. I'm sure all of you listening to this story who knew it will feel equally as I do that I'm so glad that dirty John Meehan is out of that family's life and all of those women's lives, and I hope that they've gone on to live happier, healthier existences, knowing that they are safer because that man is not walking the same streets as them. Let me know your thoughts, let me know your feelings. Have I told you things that you weren't aware of? Do you feel that you know this story a little bit more deeply? I would love to know. As ever, I'm really sorry that I've done this whole thing with the weirdest voice, but like I said, crime and consistency is a bit of a passion for me, so I'm doing it in spite of the fact that I feel like I'm gargling with gravel. Like really, really sharp gravel as well, guys. Thanks for all your support. Thanks to my Patreon subs. Thanks for my YouTube membership. Can't make this without you guys. You mean the world. Be safe. And also, you know, do background check on anybody you're gonna date. Pays dividends, kids. See you later.